Whether it's dispatching enemies quickly up close or infiltrating a restricted space without alerting anyone in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, stealth is the quintessential element at play that has a potential for Henry to dominate any related challenge regardless of their difficulty. In order for such a thing to happen, however, a comprehensive understanding of this skill is necessary. We have several intriguing discoveries about experience gain, resulting from a number of experiments across the game's 2 maps, as well as a close look at enemy behavior that changes depending on our character's level and other factors. Moreover, we'll also be checking out some of its corresponding perks to get some perspective of how much they impact gameplay, including one which doesn't seem to work as intended, making it slightly worse. We're going to cover all of these and more, so let's begin. According to the stealth skills description, improving it reduces Henry's noise, visibility, and conspicuousness, the 3 derived stats relevant to us for when sneaking around. Using this poacher on the lookout as an example, we can define visibility as the range at which he can start to spot a possible trespasser, but is not sure yet, as indicated by the yellow rabbit icon's appearance. Every time Henry passes this threshold, conspicuousness starts to kick in and determines how fast the NPC is able to verify who's in their line of sight, visualized for us through the upwards rotation of our rabbit icon's ears. The faster their animation, the more conspicuous Henry is, and once they're at the 12 o'clock position, it means he's now been identified. Noise, on the other hand, is a numerical representation of how loud our character's currently equipped gear is every time he moves, which determines the likelihood for this hostile to hear him as he approaches from behind. We'll be looking into these derived stats a bit more later on. For now, it's very important to be aware that the application of stealth improvement is not straightforward as it may seem. In one experiment, I compared the secondary tab when Henry's stealth skill is at level 5 and 10, without changing anything to his equipment. You can see here that there's no difference to the 3 derived stats. However, I managed to prove that our character indeed got better when I tested his visibility of 25. Using this seated bandit as an example, he started to spot Henry from about 19 paces away when his stealth is at 5. But at level 10, the enemy's detection range dropped to 17 paces. So if there's a perceptible change but is not showing up on the secondary tab, it means our character's upgrades reside on the enemy's side. This is just something to keep in mind as we talk about visibility, conspicuousness, and noise. The improvements to them by Henry's stealth skill level is hidden. Now, from a player's point of view, there are 3 things which can be directly controlled for calibrating them. The biggest factor, of course, is Henry's equipment that establishes the base value, which are then altered by perks. In addition, the act of crouching also has a drastic effect, and it reveals a couple of noteworthy qualities about the player menu. Regardless of Henry's level, his conspicuousness shall drop by 25 points, and noise will get cut down by half upon lowering his stance. We know this because modifications to it are reflected within the secondary tab. On paper, visibility remains the same even if Henry is crouching, but in practice, there's also a slight improvement to it, which can easily be validated by toggling between standing up and lowering his stance near the edge of a hostile's detection range. So when assembling an equipment set for sneaking, it's a good idea to crouch first before opening the player menu for a more accurate representation of the derived stats. It's also important to keep track of these changes within this page specifically and not on the inventory panel, because it only shows the base values marked in red, an indication that something is altering it, but no specific numbers are shown, unlike in the other tab. Noise in particular is quite interesting because it seems like the stat can rise beyond 100, but we can't see it. In one example, I've set this to 90, and as expected, the reduction is 45 points. But when I equipped several more pieces of armor, the noise value didn't go beyond 100, but the crouching bonus progressively went down. I assume it's the developers' way of saying Henry's equipment is so rackety at this point that his proficiency at staying quiet while sneaking is affected. Apart from everything we've covered so far, there are also a number of external factors that affect these three stats, and the test results using specific character setups indicate that not all of them are implemented equally in accordance with Henry's skill level. We'll talk about those next. Since visibility and conspicuousness are linked to an NPC's eyesight, the range at which one can start to spot our character and how fast he can be identified are also highly dependent on the lighting conditions of an environment. To find out how much it varies, I used a mid-level Henry whose stealth skill level is 18 and visibility stat set to 10. Using this yellow plant as our distance marker, an enemy is able to detect him from 13 paces away at midday, and there seems to be a slight reduction to their sight range early in the morning and late afternoon by about 1 pace. Furthermore, there's no variation to this whether our character is in broad daylight or within some woods. The huge differential to visibility only occurs once the game transitions to nighttime, which starts a bit earlier than expected from 2000 and ends late at 0600. During these hours, enemy vision drops to about 2 paces, and it doesn't matter even if they're carrying a torch, they won't see a thing. What's fascinating about this observation is that the detection range is similar to interior spaces I've tested, whether a room is pitch black or when I position Henry next to a fireplace during daytime. The NPC's detection range did not change. So my theory is that the illumination of any interior space is perpetually considered as a nighttime condition, unaffected by any light source. Meanwhile, conspicuousness, which is inherently tied to visibility, is quite fascinating as well because of how it works. You see, bringing this stat down all the way to 0 is possible through crouching, just like in the equipment setup I've been using so far. But once an enemy spots Henry, the recognition function doesn't completely stop, and it even speeds up if our character gets detected at a much closer distance. This means our character's conspicuousness value is just one part of what determines an enemy's recognition speed. The other portion, which most likely resides on NPCs themselves, is a variable number that gets larger the closer Henry is. Therefore, the sole purpose of lowering conspicuousness is to buy us time in breaking an enemy's line of sight every time our character gets spotted. The closer they are, the smaller our avoidance window becomes. Doing so within settlements is not too difficult because there are a lot of things we can use for cover. But out in the wilderness, our choices are narrowed down to rocks, or better yet, bushes. These shrubbery are excellent not only for blocking a foe's gaze, but also as hiding spots. They're so good, in fact, that an enemy won't see Henry, even if he's wearing a highly visible gear from a very close distance while standing up. But if there are no bushes nearby and we need to break line of sight in a pinch, tree trunks also work quite well as long as they're wide enough to conceal the target from our view, like in our example here. For the most part, visibility and conspicuousness react somewhat predictably to proximity estimations. But noise, on the other hand, seems to have its own set of rules, because I found out that an enemy's hearing only starts to work from a close distance. Here we have Henry, equipped with the same heavy armor set demonstrated earlier, whose noise value is way past 100. At 5 paces away, I can still jump around without alerting the hostile in front of him. It's only when I take a step forward and repeat the action that he'll be alerted to my presence. This experiment is conducted with Henry's stealth skill at 18. But we can tell such enemy behavior is not caused by character progression, because the same hearing limitation can also be observed much earlier at level 6. With the sneaking kit that I have, I was able to bring down noise to 9. However, having such a low value doesn't mean we'll be able to walk near an enemy without being heard. Now, when I lower his stance and activate the Weasel Boy perk, it drops down to 1. But even this is not guaranteed to avoid detection if we fidget around while moving fast, as you can see here. Therefore, when it comes to sneaking up from behind, it's not necessary to hunker down if our target is still far away. But if we're within 4 paces of them, that's when we should do so. And once Henry is just a few steps behind, we should slow down his approach before attempting a takedown. Now that we've covered the technicalities behind our 3 derived stats and how they can affect sneaking, we can now move on to the other equally important subject of experience gain. According to the stealth skills description, we can earn experience for it through pickpocketing, bypassing locks, subduing foes, and sneaking near enemies. But because thievery is a broad subject that deserves its own separate video, we're going to focus on the latter methods. And the initial question I had in mind is, which move gives more experience, knocking out an enemy or eliminating them? In order to answer this, I checked out the XP gained by dispatching foes on 12 different areas, consisting of 6 encampments each from the game's 2 maps. There's one complication though, because in a separate test, I found out that the skill's XP gain drops as its level gets higher. So what I did is visited each area with the same skill level, 6 for Trotsky region and 18 for Kuttenberg. In turn, everything I'll be sharing with you were the results per enemy camp. Now if all we care about is the experience gain for stealth alone, I can tell you right now that there's virtually no difference regardless if we choke out the target or terminate them. It's only when we take note of the total XP where the gap between the two appears. This is because every time Henry knifed an enemy, there was a bonus experience to strength, usually 12 points at skill level 6 and 7 for level 18. In addition, 8 points were also given to vitality, which was constant on all test areas. Meanwhile, knocking out an enemy granted XP to strength as well, but was much lower at 2 points, although it's still a bit higher in comparison to agility that only got a single point every time. Furthermore, there's also something going on with the unarmed combat skill. When a target got choked out without any problem, 1 point was awarded to it. But successfully doing so after they tried struggling free increased the XP gain to 4. Regardless if this happened or not, however, it's very clear that getting rid of a target granted more total XP. You'll also notice that I didn't mention finishing enemies off after they fell unconscious, and it's because such a move didn't give anything at all. On top of these findings, I also wanted to see if there's a variation between taking down a target that's awake or asleep, and surprisingly, there was a calculable difference. It's very subtle by around 2 to 3 points in most cases, but the results were also very consistent across the board. So when it comes to stealth, we'll always get a bit more XP from an enemy that's awake, while in totality, getting rid of them is better regardless if they're asleep or not. Now, according to the agility stats description, we can improve on it through stealth as well, but there's no mention exactly how. As it turns out, the large XP gain for both of them is done by simply moving around near enemies while crouching, at about 15 paces away or closer. This is a highly effective method because experience is given every few steps, and it still works regardless if nearby units are asleep, but not if they're unconscious or deceased. Best of all, this trick is not limited to hostile NPCs, because I found out that crouch moving within private spaces also has the same effect, even if no one's around. To verify this, I visited a few homes and other places tagged with the private icon on every village around the 2 maps, as well as 10 houses within Kuttenberg. It's quite fascinating how the trick functioned on all of them, but in some instances it didn't work until I restarted the game. So I'm not sure if this is an intended effect or if it's a bug. In any case, I think we can safely assume that it will work on any area with restricted access. Just keep in mind that it will temporarily stop if Henry is spotted by someone, so this act should be done out of view from others. To a lesser degree, the same XP trick also works within many interior spaces that are not considered private, such as inns, bathhouses, and shops. But I can't guarantee that it will always work on every space you test it on because there's no discernible pattern. For example, I know it functions at Hangman's Halter Tavern, especially around midnight when almost no one is around. But when I tested it at the Devil's Den, it didn't work even after restarting the game. So when it comes to skulking around within public spaces, your agility and stealth experience may vary. But just to prove that such a thing really works, one place you can try it out very early in the game is at Blacksmith Radovan's home in Takov. Just like we talked about, it's an interior space that's not considered private, and there are certain times in a day when nobody's around to disrupt our XP farming. Starting with a stealth skill level of 6, it only took 4 minutes and 38 seconds of sneaking around to advance it towards level 10. During the course of my research, this subtopic regarding experience gain probably took the longest to assemble, and along the way, there were a lot of annotations made about stealth in general, especially when it comes to perks that you'll definitely want to know. When we think about it, getting rid of enemies by poisoning their food is technically a stealthy move, but unfortunately, such action doesn't give any skill experience to it. As for ranged weapons, the only time it can happen is if the perks Ambusher and Surprise Attack are activated. But shooting at a hostile itself doesn't yield anything. These two are very powerful for eliminating hostiles from a distance, but when dealing with them up close, there are also 2 perks we can use that supposedly will make takedowns much easier, namely Tight Grip, which is part of the Strength stat, and Sandman, found within the Unarmed Combat skill. To find out if they really do anything, I tested knocking out enemies from 4 encampments around Kuttenberg to see how many times Henry will be able to silence targets without giving them a chance to struggle free, both with the perks disabled and activated. According to the results, there's definitely an improvement to the success rate when Tight Grip and Sandman were in use. But since the save file used for this test placed our character at around mid-level range, his takedown action was not always guaranteed to work initially. The only times I've observed when it always succeeded was if our mark is asleep or sitting down on top of an object. We don't even have to press anything after initiating a move, it's automatic. Upon going through all of the perks, I noticed that a number of them are specifically designed for suppressing noise, but the ones which caught my attention were Weasel Boy and Rodent, mainly because we have to choose between the two. Now, it's important to note that Rodent's main effect can be substituted by a drinking perk called Beerfoot, simply by making Henry drunk, while the effectiveness of its additional capability in lowering the sound of opening doors is questionable. To illustrate this, we have here a villager who's standing very close to a door within their house. As I repeatedly open and close it, you'll notice that she doesn't really pay attention to the racket being generated, even without the perk, and it reflects the majority of what I've experienced in my tests. It's only on very rare occasions that I've seen NPCs react to their creaking. Most of the time, they're more bothered by the sight of doors being left open, and is actually what causes them to start thinking that maybe something is wrong. So it's up to you which one to activate. But regardless of what is chosen, it's worth noting that these two only affect the noise's base value. The crouching bonus is still referring to the original number before the perk's reduction, amplifying its effect. In addition to those, there's also a very powerful perk from the craftsmanship skill called Well Fitted that reduces the noise of any gear we repair using an armorer's kit, which essentially allows us to supplement our sneaking equipment with almost a full set of armor. In our example here, the default noise value is 53, but after activating the perk and repairing all of them, it dropped all the way down to 18, so it's highly effective. The only bits of armor we can't equip is a chainmail coif and shirt because they're big contributors to noise. By simply equipping this Saxon hauberk, for instance, the value jumped from 18 to 61, so this one's definitely out. As far as stealth is concerned, it does work as expected. The only downside to it, apart from what heavy armor brings, is mainly psychological, because there's something off-putting about skulking around while wearing plated gear, especially that we can hear it softly rattle while moving. But if there's one stealth perk we should definitely avoid, it's natural camouflage, that supposedly decreases Henry's visibility the dirtier his clothes are, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work as intended. In one experiment, we can see this enemy's detection range starts just in front of these poppies. But after I made sure Henry's gear is indeed soiled and activated natural camouflage, he started getting spotted a bit further away by about 3 paces. I've tested this a number of times on different enemies, and the results were always the same. Hopefully this is something that can be fixed through a patch, but for now, don't waste your perk points on this, because it makes Henry more visible instead of the other way around. Earlier in the video, we've established that eliminating enemies is always better when it comes to experience gain. However, knocking them out also has a distinct advantage with regards to ease of execution. When a hostile is stationary, it's not a problem for either of these two actions. But if they're walking around, it's more difficult to get rid of them. First off, both moves require Henry to be very close behind his target, or at an angle, but they don't work from the side. Second, Henry's movement while crouching only has 2 speed settings, even when using a controller. There's nothing in between which perfectly matches the pace of a walking NPC. So the best thing that can be done is to move fast as we approach, then slow down once within range before pressing and holding the eliminate button. With practice, it's possible to pull this off seamlessly, but as we've noted earlier, fast movement while in this stance as we try to keep up will eventually draw their attention, so lingering around for too long is risky. By default, when a hostile is in a relaxed state, their hearing behavior comes in 2 parts. The first time something is sensed, they'll audibly react to it, but won't do anything else. However, if it happens again, they'll reach for their weapon and start looking around. The problem is, as they do that, our takedown actions momentarily disappear in the middle of that animation, making it difficult to get rid of them. Furthermore, enemies will also skip the first part if they're actively looking for someone, such as when we try to lure them using a pebble. This is where the advantage of choking out enemies comes into play. Since it's actuated with a quick press of the same input, we can simply mash the button while approaching a target, and it will activate immediately once within range. Moreover, in the event that they get alerted, staying close to them and doing the same action guarantees that a chokehold will eventually happen as they turn around. This pretty much covers everything I learned about stealth during the course of my research. Unsurprisingly, making Henry improve upon it is still founded on lowering his derived stats to the fullest extent. But as you've seen here, there's also a lot more to it than meets the eye. If you'd like to check out the entire table about experience gain, along with others shown in this video, I left a link to their PDF copy in the description below.